And what impact of the political isolation law do we think will have on Libya's democratic development?
I think, Senator, you're reading my mind this morning as I listened to the news over the last several days. It's definitely a challenge, but I believe, again, if confirmed, one of the reasons I believe we need to get an ambassador out there is to provide the support to the government that will help it to enhance its control over these militias. The Libyan people deserve far better than this. They struggled bravely to throw off 40 years of intimidation, I don't believe in exchange for another government of intimidation or intimidation by armed groups or militias. So again, working on the three, you've addressed in your comment there, the three stools of the table, the three legs of the stool that are going to be critical to Libya's development, which is again security, strengthening Libya's security through supporting its government and training of a professional military and security regime, which we've already started to do in many ways, disarming the militias, of course. But also engaging with them on governance and getting them to work with them to look at the impact of these kinds of laws, this exclusion, this isolation law, and the impact that would have on their unity and in future as a government. And civil society, which is a critical part of Libya. I mean, the role that civil society has played, the role of women already has been significant, and the Libyan people themselves are going to have to make their voices heard, and we will help them with that in ensuring that we don't go back to a situation of intimidation. But again, it's one of the reasons I feel an urgency to get on the ground, to have an ambassador there who can actually guide our efforts on this side of the ocean, and as well as guiding and helping the Libyans to achieve some of the objectives that they want to strengthen that security and to disarm the militias.
You mentioned civil society as part of the equation. How do you intend, in the security environment that you'll be in, to reach out to civil society inside of Libya as part of fostering a greater, more pluralistic participation by its society?
Well, that's a good question, and that's where I'm going to have to look at the balance every single day of this. You know, an ambassador doesn't wake up without considering security. That just goes part and parcel with the job. And, you know, when I was the ambassador in Kuwait, even though it's a completely different or a very different situation, I didn't wake up one morning without thinking what possibly could happen to us that day. And in fact, in Kuwait of all places, that was a place where I canceled a Marine ball the day of the ball. Now, you have to know what that means in Kuwait, because, of course, the invasion of Iraq was the liberation of Kuwait was the largest Marine deployment since World War II, so it's a big event for us there. But a combination of factors with intelligence and some other anomalies led me the day of the ball on a Friday to cancel the ball and to wake up, to rouse the Amir's brother, in fact, who was the head of their security, who protected the embassy, and asked him to swap out all of his guards. I take this very seriously, our security. That said, I think there are a number of ways that we can connect. We have a package. The situation is changing all the time. It's very unstable. We all know that. It's something we look at every day. We are working closely. I think we have a package, though, for travel that allows us to get out, not as much as we might like. But there are also, fortunately, other ways of connecting with people, whether it's through, you know, media, through Skype, through WhatsApp, through all kinds of connections within Libya to have us be able to talk, even while we might not be as physically present the way we might like in other environments. But again, sir, until I get out on the ground and see what that is, first thing I do at every mission, and I have done in the past, is to do a terrain walk with my security officer. I did it in Kuwait, I did it in Istanbul. When I was principal officer, I expect to do that in Tripoli as well. I'll get out, we'll walk the walk, we'll see what we can do, we'll talk about how we can extend, talk about meeting people in other locations. I mean, people can travel out too. We can take advantage of trips outside of Libya. We can take advantage of other locations inside. I'm just going to have to be creative, and we'll look at that as we go, sir.
All right. To both of you, Chad and Libya share a porous border and a rough neighborhood by any definition. What do you see as some of the key regional challenges, and how could, as chiefs of mission, such as yourselves, work together to improve the U.S. ability to respond and help shape development in the region?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that us being here together today, myself and Ambassador Jones, speaks to the importance of a shared approach to regional threats in the area that we will both in which we will both be working if confirmed. The importance of this coordination is, I think, absolutely key because, as you know, there has been a historic division in the State Department between the Maghreb and the northern part of Africa and the rest. That is now being addressed specifically by the creation of a Sahel Maghreb working group at the Secretary's level in the State Department. I think that's a good first step in this direction. It's clear that we're also going to have to maintain personal communication and personal coordination of our efforts to address the threats as they emerge along our shared border. And again, it's also important to recognize that it's not simply along the Libyan-Chadian border where the threats arise, but there's a regional dimension to this which extends from Senegal all the way to the other side of Sudan. If confirmed, I look forward to working with all my colleagues in this effort to address the continuing and continually worrisome threats of terrorism in this area.
Senator, I would second everything that Jim has said, and I would also say that the problems has gone even beyond the Sahel. I mean, we know that the flow of weapons from Libya is reaching as far as Syria and other places of interest to us in Gaza that matter in a very challenging security environment. And I think more than ever we recognize that working with these countries is not a bilateral issue, it's a global issue. And I intend to not only draw on my colleagues around all of our resources at State, Defense Department, but also with other countries who have assets and interests in the region, who are like-minded, who can support our efforts to disarm, which we've already been working on with the Libyans, to dismantle man-pads, to locate and destroy chemical weapons stores, and again, a lot of the material and the things that have been left over from first of all, Gaddafi's collection of weapons over the years, of ordnance and other things, but also of the results of their own civil war, of their own uprisings there.
Thank you. Senator Corker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony, and again for the families for being here. And I guess, Ambassador Jones, I would ask, the first question is, what have you done to cause people to send you to Libya? But I know that we talked a little bit about that yesterday in the office. My serious question is, we talked a little bit about the safety issue, and I know we traveled through there in October right after the unfortunate events in Benghazi. You stated the importance of security, and just for the record, if you would just one more time emphasize that, I would appreciate it.
That's security in Libya, how we'll take
care. Or your
care
personnel.
For my personnel there, absolutely, sir. And let me say that I think our daughters are asking what they did to us to have their dad is in Islamabad and I'm going off to Tripoli, and I think they're wondering what they did to cause that, but it's really just to pay for their college, sir. But what I would say though on security, and again this is something that is well, as we know, it's deadly serious for us. How do we manage security in the building and without? And I would like to say that, you know, over the course of my career, and even though I know my first assignment no one mentions because it sounds cushy, it was Buenos Aires, it happened to also be during the Falklands-Malvinas War, and right after our, recently after our embassy in Tripoli had been, or in Tripoli, our embassy in Tehran had been overrun, which changed the nature of diplomatic practice and made people worry if we weren't safe anymore, you know, under Vienna Convention in our embassies, how are we going to make this work? I have, throughout my career, and certainly in later years, and certainly as ambassador and principal officer, always had a direct connection and picked up the phone with Washington, worked very closely with security at Post, worked very closely with DS and with other agencies at Post who have access to intelligence and other assets. I mean, it is the role of the ambassador. The ambassador is the principal security officer at Post, and it is the ambassador who has to decide whether to allow people to travel here or there, whether to ask for additional assets, whether to insist on additional assets, and if you don't get the answers you need, you pick up the phone and you speak to the people who are responsible for that, okay, sir, and that's what I intend to do. That's what I've always done. You know, there are many ways to approach that and to continue to press that. Okay. We do know that in the past, look, Yes,
that's good. I got it. Thank you. We were involved in Libya and certainly have a responsibility there because of that involvement. But it would appear to me, and I think I'd love to hear your comments, that we've underestimated the challenges there. And I've met with government officials there, and it's really not a government. I mean, when you look at the responsibilities that they have, and you look at the militias throughout the country, it's almost remarkable that the country's functioning. Do you think we've underestimated the challenges there?
Senator, until I get out on the ground, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned,
based on the briefings that you've had,
based on the briefings, I don't know that we underestimated. I think there has been frustration, and I certainly know that we've had a setback in these last 8-9 months without having an ambassador on the ground. It's really set us back in our efforts to support the government there. Beyond that, could I say, did we underestimate? I think that, again, progress after these kinds of transitions, it is unpredictable, it is organic, it is not linear, it's not formulaic, and I think we just have to double our efforts, because what I do know is that if we're not there making the effort, we most certainly will lose out. We've never won a battle we haven't shown up for.
Yeah. So I know, again, that you want to get on the ground, you want to see how things are, and they're changing daily. And so your briefings a few weeks ago regarding Libya today would be very different, I think. But based on what you know today, what is it, and typically when an ambassador comes in, it's the beginning where you lay the groundwork for what you're going to do. Over the first 6 months you're there, what are your goals?
Oh, obviously, I think the principal goal is to address the security vacuum, to address the capacity vacuum of the government in terms of its security. Again, how you approach that comes from a number of different areas, arenas, and it's not purely training and military training or security training or intelligence, although all of those things are hugely important. But I think what we've also seen in the aftermath of Benghazi was the importance of civil society as well, and the importance of the Libyan people themselves making their voices heard and getting involved in supporting and holding to what they have fought so hard to gain, which is this democratic transition. I think they have more skin in this game than anyone else, and they know that.
And what happens in that transition if we end up, especially with the law that passed on Sunday and some of the resignations that are taking place and others that are being pursued, what happens to our relationship if we end up with militiamen basically in these cabinet posts?
Sir,
I might say when we end up with militiamen in posts. Okay.
I'm not going to accept that premise quite yet, Senator, but I will say that we have to be prepared to engage with anyone who is committed to a democratic transition in Libya and through peaceful means.
What if it becomes an Islamic state?
Again, I think we have to be, people have talked about the Muslim Brotherhood there. We have to be looking at many layers there, whether cutting off support for extremist groups, for extremist ideologies, however that support, whatever form that support may take. And we also at the same time need to be engaging with those groups who have, again, eschewed violence, who are committed to a democratic Libya that's representative. And that, until I get on the ground, until I can do more, there, I just am not prepared to rule it out, to, rule anything in or rule anything out at this stage. I'm not saying it's simple. It's not.
And as you are in the briefings that you're having, and I know you've played an important role in the State Department recently, how do you think the issues that we're dealing with in Libya right now, we were involved, but not overly involved. We've ended up being where we are there today, and we have Syria, which is developing and has some similar characteristics, not all. But how do you think that our experiences in Libya are shaping our responses as it relates to Syria?
So I wouldn't be in a position to. I've not been involved with the policy making on Syria. I think clearly there are many challenges out there, and I think all of these challenges are indicative of the transitions. I mean, people want change. I think if there's one lesson we've learned, it's that authoritarian and autocratic governments don't develop civil society that can sustain itself in the immediate aftermath of change, and that's where we need to be prepared to aid and strengthen and step in and support. I mean, if anything, it gets back. I was reading the other day, I told people there are 3 books I'm recommending to people before I go to Libya. One is, I'm giving a pitch, I'm not getting royalties, is Gordon Woods, but he is a Brown author, but The American Revolution. The second is Machiavelli, the Prince. And the third is the Federalist Papers, to look at how the idea of sovereignty emerges from the people, and how people in these places also need to understand that they're not yielding authority, they're creating their authority as a nation when they when they vote, when they participate, and when that's part of that's a manifestation, that national strength is a manifestation of national will, of the people's will, and that's the lesson the Libyans and the Syrians and others have to learn and have to work with. And it's taken us, it's progressive long while as well.
Thank you. And
thank you.
Chairman, I can stop or keep going since no one else is here. Why don't you go ahead and then I'll go again. Okay, well, I might move on to Chad for a second. Thank you very much for your testimony. What do you see was recently in Mali, and I know that Chad has, certainly played a role there. What do you see the threat to Chad being relative to Mali?
Thank you, Senator. My sense is that, and I think this is a widely shared view, is that the government of Chad sees the regional threats very clearly.
It's rough and incomplete. I know 2 headlines from this morning. Reuters, quote, Libya defense minister quits over siege of ministries by gunmen. And the Wall Street Journal, quote, Libyans anticipate purge after ban of ex-Gaddafi officials. Despite the challenges and despite what's happening, I continue to believe we can't give in to the temptation that our support for the democratic aspirations of people in Libya and elsewhere in the broader Middle East is naive or mistaken. I don't think we can resign ourselves to the false belief that the Arab Spring is doomed to be defined by the dark fanaticism of terrorists. I continue to believe that was and remains a desire for democracy and freedom that has inspired millions of people to peaceful action, and Libya's example should remind us once again that even the worst dictators can be overthrown and swept into the ash heap of history where they belong. I am deeply concerned by the Libyan parliament's vote on Sunday to adopt the political isolation law and the ongoing siege of government ministries. The passage of the law exposes, on the one hand, the government's inability to deal with the armed groups, as well as the overall weaknesses of Libya's central government. In your assessment, what impact will the political isolation law have on Libya's transition and the integrity of Prime Minister Zaidan's cabinet?
Thank you, Senator, and I share your views that the Libyan people owe the best we can give them to help them succeed in their democratic transition. I also would like to mention, subsequent, Senator Corker, to your question, I'm hearing from our operations center that it looks like the Libyan Prime Minister may have convinced his defense minister not to resign. Let's hope that that holds true. So, again, it's an uncertain situation. I believe that the isolation law is something that I certainly would hope to address, if confirmed, to get out with members and get them to rethink the application of that law, how it's defined, how they define many of the conditions. I think that we all know from our own experience with legislation and dealing with that as Americans that sometimes much lies in how we apply it and execute the law, and I'm hoping to get out there and be confirmed and have some influence in that, to let them look at the future of their country instead of the immediate desire for revenge, or they need to look further than that. And I think the Libyan people know that, and I do believe with you, sir, that the majority of the Libyan people have fought too hard and want too badly to succeed in a government that is not one of intimidation. They've had that for 40 years. They need a government of representation, sir.
And you would agree that the Libyan people are largely very appreciative of the United States assistance in the overthrow of Gaddafi. It's not an environment where there's anti-Americanism. In fact, there's strong pro-Americanism.
Absolutely, sir. And I, prior to your arrival, I mentioned in my statement that I had, in fact, received a number of emails from private Libyans once the White House announced my candidacy, welcoming me to Libya and offering their hope for the relationship to continue strongly. And we've lost a lot of time, sir. We need to get going on this.
Well, that's what I was going to mention next. After Gaddafi was overthrown, the light footprint was enacted. Many of us argued strenuously for the kinds of assistance, whether it be in border security, whether it be treatment of the wounded, whether it be helping organize military. And I think it's pretty clear in the objective view of most observers that we've done very little. For example, I had 30,000 wounded. I think we treated 3 in a Boston hospital. There still is the issue of sovereign immunity, which seems to have hung up our ability to send people there to train their military. Part of it is the Libyans' fault. One heck of a lot of it is our fault. And I would expect that, and I've talked to Secretary Kerry about this problem, and you're going to have to start unsticking things, but you're going to have to get the support of the administration, which so far has not been there. And so if you're going to succeed in Libya, Ambassador, then you're going to have to speak truth to power. And truth to power is that we are not giving them the assistance for a whole variety of reasons, not all ours, that will assist them in becoming a functioning democracy. You're not going to be able to go to eastern Libya anytime soon, because it's no longer, not just because of what happened in Benghazi, but it's no longer in control of the government. And the situation in many ways, as evidenced by yesterday's vote, continues to deteriorate.